I would first like to give Melissa a shout out. She is a remarkable and valued county commissioner in Coos County. She's doing a wonderful job. She's engaged at the local level, the state level, and the national level, and she serves us very, very well on the coast, and we're very lucky to have her as one of our county commissioners in Coos County. I'm Katty McHugh, and I represent House District 9, and I'm honored to facilitate this panel this afternoon, this very important panel about a topic that is, of course, of great import to many, many people in the state of Oregon. So I appreciate each one of you taking the time to travel here and join us today. But one of the things I've neglected to do this morning was really give a very heartfelt thank you to the city of Florence. The Coastal Caucus has put this together for 8 years. It's been supported by our coastal tribes for the entire 8 years. This is the first time it's been a partnership, for those of you who came in today and weren't here yesterday, with the city of Florence, who has provided this incredible venue for us today. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Mayor Henry and the staff of the Event Center, and Aaron, the city manager, who's really helped us make this successful. Some of you may know this. Thank you. Believe it or not, when we were planning this, the staff was putting all this together, we thought we had 450 slots that we were trying to fill for the conference. And recently, Rosie made a decision to cut off the registration at 600. So I think that tells you that there's an interest in issues that impact the coast. A lot of people wanted to be here. It may be because Florence is beautiful on an August weekday, but on the other hand, I think these are topics that are near and dear to people's hearts and they care deeply about. That being said, the topic of this panel is Hindsight is 2020, and I think Rosie did a play on words that I just figured out. Changing the climate of the carbon reduction conversation. And this is the industry perspective. When this panel ends, you're going to hear a policymaker perspective, but this 2-hour session is the industry maker perspective. And as all of you know, the Oregon Legislature recently considered a carbon pricing policy to combat the effects of greenhouse gas emissions. House Bill 2020 would have established a climate policy office, created a climate action program, a market-based cap and trade policy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions levels in Oregon. The bill was supported by a wide coalition of people and industry and organizations. While the bill was supported, there were many others who were opposed to the bill. Some from farming, manufacturing, the transportation sector, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, about unintended costs, especially to our smaller and lower income communities. So this panel, and I'm not going to disclose who's who here, you have opponents, you have proponents, and you have neutral parties on this panel. It's a very well-balanced organization, and I think you're going to hear a wide array of perspectives. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin, since we have the luxury of a little bit of time, to do an introduction of each member and then allow them just a couple, 3-4 minutes to talk about the industry or the organization that they represent, why they're here. Then we're going to go into questions for the panel. So we're going to start with our introductions. And to my immediate right, Macy Wessels. And Macy, thank you for traveling over here today. Macy is a co-owner of Bossart Trucking. The company is an international agricultural exporter. Along with their sister company, Bosco and Presco, they employ 52 people in the Albany and Salem areas, or in the Willamette Valley. 3 different companies align and work together, providing straw to customers all over the world. So they compress it and they ship it, as well as agricultural products locally. Macy grew up in a family farming business. She's been involved in all aspects of the business, from working in the field to the office. She's a beaver. Thank you, congratulations. With a bachelor's degree in crop and soil science. I was an ag major at Oregon State, and I got to tell you, some of those classes are really hard. She's president of Bossart Trucking and manager of Presco. Presco presses the straw that will be shipped across the seas to be used as feed for cattle being raised mainly in the Far East. Managing long-standing relationships with local farmers and valued customers, Macy works closely with customers to get their products delivered on time, loves her local farming community and is proud to be deeply rooted in the great world of agriculture. Macy's the mother of an amazing 12-year-old daughter, Addison. Macy Wessels.
Hi, thank you for having me today. Obviously, I come from the transportation industry, and so House Bill 2020 would have had a profound impact on our business. And so it's really important that we're here today to talk a little bit about what it would have meant for the trucking industry. There's a lot of things that come into play. Obviously, the Port of Portland and the closing of T6 would have been one of those things. Since T6 closed, there's a lot of trucks now that have to travel through Portland. And when you start talking about House Bill 2020, we also need to talk about the fact that 2 years ago, with House Bill 2017, the transportation or trucking industry supported a 53% increase in our overall costs with our Wait Mama tax. I mean, that was to our bottom line, and that's because we wanted to help and improve roads and be a part of the solution. And so House Bill 2020 would have also increased our costs again 2 years later. So memories are pretty short when they start talking about the fact that they now want to increase our fuel costs as well. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. Next we have Nancy Hamilton. Welcome, Nancy. Nancy is the director of an organization called the Oregon Business for Climate. It's a statewide organization focused on mobilizing industry support and business leadership to advance climate policy and institute a price on carbon emissions, while at the same time strengthening Oregon's economy. As director, Nancy's been deeply engaged in many of the efforts that occurred during the 2019 session to pass House Bill 2020. Nancy's long been known as a skilled negotiator and effective communicator. She brings deep relationships across a diverse cross-section of stakeholders in the Portland metro area and across the state. There have been developed over 2 decades, while moving her from work as Chief of Staff to Mayor Tom Potter to her focus on workforce and economic development for Governor Kulinkoski. Now in her 7th year as a certified emerging small business and women in business enterprise in Oregon, much of her work has been focused on economic development as it relates to carbon reduction and energy efficiency. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you very much. It's a mouthful. It makes me sound even older than I actually am, which is saying something. Thank you for having me. And as Representative McEwen noted, I represent almost 100 businesses across the state of Oregon, mostly large and mid-sized businesses who believe that it's important to put a price on carbon and to figure out ways to get there in a transition that keeps our economy thriving as we move through that change. And I guess the key points I'm hoping we can discuss here today, and I can't remember exactly the language from the description of what we're going to be talking about here today, is obviously HB 2020 didn't get over the finish line. There's, I believe, every intention of another version of some sort of policy to be presented again in the short session. And so I'm hoping we can all learn from each other about how to develop a policy that we can move over the finish line and figure out how to get there. I think the key comments that we tend to make out and around the state, the businesses who I work with, is that climate change is happening. The notion that we can do nothing is really a false proposition. It's already costing Oregonians every day based on what's happening with weather volatility, healthcare costs, resiliency issues, ocean acidification, drought, wildfires, etc. So the notion that we aren't spending any money now and we might have to spend some money later probably isn't accurate. And so I think it's helpful for us to remember that we're looking at 2 propositions here. The second is that, HB 2020 and whatever carbon pricing policy we consider moving forward is based on the notion that this state of Oregon has agreed to carbon reduction goals that we aren't meeting. And so we need to be doing more to get from here to there in a time frame that has already been determined. And so the cap and trade model is something that is of great interest to our members because it creates an opportunity for business and the marketplace to decide how to respond to that regulation. It's not going to be shoved down our throat if I say I'm going to create more carbon, or not create more carbon intensive ways of my product getting to market, then I can choose that, or I can choose to pay that cost. And so many of you may not know that the cap and trade model was originally designed by the Reagan administration to mitigate acid rain. And it worked, and it was actually the Democrats and the left that said, we don't want that model, but business liked it. And again, it's why the businesses I represent say this gives us some flexibility and opportunity there. And I think especially along the coast, we have resiliency issues. I was just listening to the infrastructure panel, and energy redundancy and resiliency is really critical here with other potential natural disaster issues. And I think that some of these reinvestments from a program like this can be extraordinarily beneficial to Oregon coastline. And communities along the Oregon coast, I think, will be able to get specifically some funding for things like resiliency, adaptation. I know the OSU building that was just designed was specifically designed not only for earthquake resiliency, but rising seawall and other kinds of natural disasters from weather volatility. And so those are the kinds of things that we are hoping that these resources can reinvest in along the coastal community. And I'll come to Florence anytime I'm invited. Just tell me you need me to pick up a package and I'm here. So I'm having a great time, and it's just gorgeous down here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next we have Chad Allen. Chad and his wife and their 5 young children, they live in Tillamook, up in Tillamook County. He began his farming career in 2005 when he joined his father on the existing dairy where he was raised. So thank you for your persistence. Chad's a graduate of Oregon State as well, and while there he participated as a member of the Dairy Club and served as president. Chad, I want to tell you, when my husband was at Oregon State, he worked at the dairy barn, and he held the record for unloading a truckload of hay. I just want you to know that. He's very proud of that still. He joined the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association Board of Directors in 2013 and has served as the association president for the last 3 years. Chad recently joined the Tillamook County Creamery Association Board of Directors and also serves on his local Land Use Planning Commission and the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. I don't know how you do that and be a dairy farmer. You're a busy guy. Additionally, Chad serves on numerous community and school activities. He believes in the power of working towards solutions in his daily work, as well as his significant volunteer commitments. So, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for... All right, well, I'd like to say thank you for having me here, inviting me here today. First, I'd like to say I'm a whole lot more comfortable in my barn boots. It's definitely outside my comfort level. But, being involved with all the things that I am, and being the chair of the Oregon Dairy Farmer Association is one of the most proudest things that I've done. To be a dairy farmer has to come from the heart. And it's a really hard job to do. It's very demanding. And you gotta be involved. If you want to make a difference in your community, in your state, in your nation, you gotta be there. You gotta be part of the conversation. You gotta be able to take a deep breath. You gotta listen to the other side, and you gotta be able to compromise sometimes. House Bill 2020. We've been watching this go along this path. We've had concerns, of its additional costs in the dairy community. The dairy industry now has been in a 4-year downturn, and we're price takers, and so we don't get to set our price. And feed costs make up 50% of our gross income. Now, transportation is a big component of that. We're big energy users, and so pennies matter. And so when you're already losing money, and you're looking at the prospects of losing more money, you're not going to be supportive of it. Now, as an industry, we have done a lot of things to try to reduce our carbon footprint through best management practices energy conversion from diesel to electricity and so forth and so on. And so we've done a lot of things. We're committed to the conversation. We want to see outcomes that are beneficial to every scale and size of operation. We certainly don't want them to favor one size over another. We have a lot of diversity in the dairies in Oregon, from organic to conventional to larger scale to small scale, and every single one of them is just as equally as important as the other. And so we want to make sure that as we carry on this conversation, that we really get a grasp of what it is we're talking about, what are those unintended consequences are going to be, because the small farms are just as important as the larger farms, as well as the medium farms. We're going to continue to have less people involved in agriculture because there's not a lot of money to be made in it all the time. You got to be passionate, you got to love it to be involved in it. And so I'd just like to say thank you for letting me be part of this conversation.
Thank you for being here. And next we have Sandra McDonough. I learned something today that I didn't know about Sandy. She was a reporter. I didn't know that. An interesting little tidbit. Sandy's president of the Oregon Business Industries, OBI. She joined OBI as president and CEO in October of 18, so she hasn't been in this position very long, but she comes with a storied history. You're not going to tell everything, are you? She spent 14 years as president and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance. And under her leadership became the Portland metro area's most prominent and impactful business organization, and we've all heard of that organization. Earlier, she spent 2 decades in the energy industry and holds executive level positions at PG&E and Pacific Corp. She also worked as a newspaper reporter with stints at the Oregonian and the Seattle Times. We're glad she came back to Oregon. McDonough holds bachelor degrees in German, which I didn't know, and journalism from the U of O, and has extensive experience serving on nonprofit boards. Currently, she serves on the board of New Adventures for Youth, a Portland-based organization providing housing and education and job training for homeless at-risk youth. And Sandy, we're delighted you're here.
Thanks, I'm thrilled to be here. Bill just asked me if I reported fake news. I don't think we had found that term yet, so I plead innocent. And I'm also thrilled to be here in Florence. When I was a student at U of O, I was one of those kids who would cut those German classes and come over here and play in the dunes. I love this community. I am now at Oregon Business and Industry. We are a large, broad, statewide organization. We have about 1,600 members in all corners of the state. And when you have that many members, you are going to represent a broad diversity of opinions. So on this particular issue, you see that a lot. I have some members who are in Nancy's organization, some members who are represented here, and people who, generally we had some folks who thought it was time to pass a bill, others who questioned whether this makes sense to do at the state level versus the federal level. But I will say that there were some common beliefs, and one of them was climate change is real, it needs to be addressed, but how it's done is important. And as I said, some folks, I think there's a legitimate issue about whether it should be state or federal, but if there is a bill, I think our members believe broadly that it needs to, number one, achieve real reductions in carbon, needs to be fair, needs to be good for the Oregon economy and not detrimental, and that the costs matter. And I think that issue around the cost was important to all of our members, whether they were on the side of pass a bill now or one that was, they're saying we're not really sure this should be happening in the way that it is. And at the end of the day, I think it was the cost that really got in the way in how that discussion happened, and I'd be happy to discuss that as well. But I'm glad that we have the trucking industry here. You guys did an excellent job of representing your point of view, and I think what we saw in the discussion is that this was a bill that impacted all Oregonians, and the costs were going to be impactful to all Oregonians, to business, but also to consumers. So I hope we can talk a bit about that today.
Thanks. Thank you. Mr. Kerr, welcome. Bill is president of the United Steelworkers Local 1097, representing 600 union employees at the Georgia Pacific Wanda Mill, which is located in Clatsop County. He started his career in the paper industry 34 plus years ago, working his way up through the ranks from his entry-level position to his current role in operating one of the world's largest and fastest tissue machines. I wonder how many have toured a paper plant. Anybody toured a paper plant? Look at that. Cool. Bill also serves on the National Steering Committee of the Pulp and Paper Works Resource Council, national grassroots organization whose sole mission is to find solutions to issues affecting the forest products industry. Each year, Bill travels to DC to help educate our nation's leaders on the direct impact that current legislation and/or proposed regulations will have on the forest products industry, and how they can make a difference in saving businesses and jobs. Bill's a fisherman, he's a hunter, enjoys time with his family, and he has 6 grandchildren. Pretty cool. Welcome, Bill.
All right, thank you very much. Today I'm not only here to talk about House Bill 2020, but it is an impact that reaches not just my industry, but every household in the state. The Oregon pulp paper industry as a whole is one of the greenest jobs out there. We were green before green was cool, and I actually get credit for pinning that. And I've had some of our state senators and representatives use that term. We use most of our power from biomass, hydro, steam, and natural gas. We have reduced our carbon footprint by 75% just since 1990. We figured out a long time ago that it's better to be stewards of the environment and instead of raping the environment. We all live and work in the areas that our mills are at. They are not sitting in downtown Portland or anything. They are out in rural America. The economy has thrived in the metropolitan areas, but our outreaching communities are still hurting. And the trickle down from 2020 would just be devastating with your transportation costs and the natural gas prices going up and coming through. The main thing is House Bill 2020, most of the mills that I represent and the industry that I represent, we are already running at pennies on the case to make it ends meet. We not only compete globally, but we have to compete internally with our own companies in other states, and they do not have the regulations. When I first looked at this and looked at the taxation, I hate to use the term, but I looked at it as the spotted owl on steroids, and we all know what that has done to Oregon, and we are still feeling the effects of it. For the first time that I can remember in my 30 plus years in the paper industry, we're finally starting to see second generation and third generation paper makers coming back and going back to work in the mills, where it used to be you graduated from high school, if mom and dad could send you to college, you went out and you pretty much left the area. You're starting to see our kids coming back, which is a great thing. We are Oregonians. We are one of the most proudest people in all 50 states I've been in. The main thing I think we need to get across is that pennies do matter. Climate change, there is an issue there, but it is not a state issue. It is not only just a national issue, it is a global issue. So if Oregon was to go to zero, as a very good friend of mine quoted, our impact would be less than 1%. It would actually be 0.14% of the reduction globally of carbon. So by shifting and basically taxing business out of the state of Oregon, they will just shift productions to other states or other countries that do not have the emission standards that we have already set for ourselves. And our footprint will be much higher, much higher. Another way I think we need to look at it, if it is going to be addressed, is I do believe we don't need to taxize industry, we need to incentivize industry into working together, coming up with better ways or more controls. Right now, I know the Newburgh steel mill is running at the best they can. They're making 100% recycled steel. The paper industry, they could use fiber 7 times. Once it is used that many times, it is actually too weak to produce paper out of it, and if we were to sell it to you, it would not be paper, it would be a chemical that you had in your hand. We've devised a way to turn it into pellets. We burn it into cogeneration. We actually went into a partnership with Class 9 PUD, and we are burning it. We are producing energy, which took them off fossil fuel, and in 1 year, in an average yearly time, we produce enough electricity to put back into the infrastructure to power 15,000 homes per year. So we need to work with industry, not against industry. We need to keep it in the state, and we need to find a way to not just dress it as state, because I learned in 7th grade science that our atmosphere is a global atmosphere. There is not an invisible shield around Oregon that whatever we do is going to stay right here. And I know I'm going over my time.
Thank you, Bill.
That's where I want to. So
How am I doing? I'm leading.
I can rant all day. I have passion for this. I have spent my time in the paper industry. I have got to live the American dream. I have supported my family. I have put a daughter through nursing school. I have a son serving in the deal. And I don't take that away from our children and our future generations coming up. That's what
Thank you. We got another hour and a half. We're good.
All right.
Thank you. Laura Anderson, thank you for being here. Laura's about an hour from home. She lives up in Newport. Laura comes from a small boat fishing family. You've had such an interesting background. Trolling for salmon, harvesting crab in the summertime on her dad's commercial fishing boat gave her an appreciation for fishing families. And a crew that bring local ocean its daily catch and an authentic understanding of its quality. She has the most amazing restaurant. If you get to Newport, you need to go eat there. And she does clearly understand quality. Seafood was literally her bread and butter growing up. Laura worked with artisanal fishermen in the Peace Corps in Hanoi, Vietnam. She has a master's degree in marine resource management from Oregon State, and understanding the science and policy of fisheries ensures that every dish served at her restaurant passes her, quote, red-face test for sustainability. So you know she is walking the walk and talking the talk. In addition to running a day-to-day operation at Local Ocean, she's also a member of the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission. Thank you for your service. And the Ocean Science Trust. Laura, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative. I think Bill was just trying to cap and trade with me on speaker time.
Yes, he was. That's okay.
I'll take my full 3 minutes. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak. Essentially, what we do at Local Ocean is we feed people. We feed people what we believe is some of the highest quality protein on the planet, some of the most sustainable and delicious food that you can eat. We serve a lot of it. Today alone, we'll probably serve 800 seafood meals. And so that really adds up. In order to do that, we buy from at least 50 different boats in our local fishing fleet in Newport and beyond. And we employ 60 year-round employees, and we amp that up by about 25-30% to meet the summertime demand. So, you know, the way I see it, there's a lot riding on this one little business's success when I look at the impacts that we have in our community. So my job as a business owner is to look out in front of that and say, what are the biggest challenges that we have, and what do I need to do to try to prepare for that? And there's no shortage of them. We've talked about labor costs and housing and workforce development here at this conference, but I think I'm on this panel because the single greatest challenge that I believe that my business faces is ocean acidification and ocean hypoxia. when the carbon comes down out of the sky and goes into the ocean, it creates acid and it reduces oxygen. And I don't think you need to be a chemical oceanographer, although I think there are some in the room. You don't need to be one to know that that's a hostile environment for life, and that's our food supply. So when I think about little calcium shells of oysters, as I'll let Mark talk about in great detail, or Dungeness crab getting dissolved by increasing acid, or fish swimming around looking for oxygen from dead zones, or the biotoxins that actually can thrive in this environment and will affect our food safety and security, I see already today real effects of this. We've had closures of our Dungeness crab season that have delayed boats going out for up to several months. We've seen reduced production and dead zones on the increase. So when I talk about this, it's serious business. It's not just some wistful environmental plea for saving the planet. This is necessary. I can't substitute other seafoods because, I mean, the name changing local ocean to foreign farmed seafoods just doesn't sound very good. And I'm not willing to go there. So I guess it's for all of those reasons that I actually supported House Bill 2020, even though I know it was very controversial amongst our fleet and the fishermen and many other businesses. I see this as such an important issue that I was willing to take that risk. The market mechanism is just faster and more efficient than regulation or relying on voluntary compliance. And in my opinion, we don't have a lot of time. We need to really make sure in the future that we reframe this as not just a terrestrial issue, this is an ocean issue. And so for the Coastal Caucus, this is really important. I think it's the ocean issue, and it's really my key issue, so that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. And Emma feeds people as well, in a little different way, and Emma wins the prize for coming the farthest today. Emma's from Chicago. Emma's the North American Sustainability Manager at the McDonald's Corporation, and she lives right near their headquarters in Chicago. She leads renewable energy, energy efficiency, and water with specific focus on the 14,000 restaurants that McDonald's has in North America. She's currently laser focused on scaling the renewable energy program at McDonald's. She graduated from Columbia University, worked for the U.S. Green Building Council, specifically on programs, events, and continuing education. From there, she moved to Chicago, where she worked for an energy and sustainability tech startup called Green Per Square Foot, leading their business and development marketing team. She went on to lead the energy and sustainability consulting group for Cushman & Wakefield before eventually ending up at McDonald's, where she has the unique opportunity to use its scale for good. At home, she's a mom to 2 young boys and enjoys traveling. So we're delighted you had an opportunity to travel to our Oregon coast today.
Thank you so much, Representative, and thank you so much for having me. This is my first time to Oregon, so thank you. It's beautiful. I'll be back. Thanks for the introduction and the detailed background, and I think the key takeaway from my background is that I have nothing to do with politics. So my role is purely sustainability focused. So I've spent the last 2 years at McDonald's developing our renewable energy strategy, and we're getting ready to make some exciting announcements around renewable energy for McDonald's, so stay tuned for that. We, a couple years ago, announced our Scale for Good platform, and Representative referenced that, and that is our sustainability platform in which we committed to 5 public goals around 5 key pillars. So we have our climate action pillar, which is near and dear to my heart. I work very closely with that we've committed to a 36% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030 at a 2015 baseline. And just to give you a sense of the scale there, that is equivalent, that greenhouse gas emission reduction is equivalent to the carbon footprint of Vietnam. So it's a giant deal. And so, you know, we want to flip that paradigm that big is bad. In my role, I want to try and prove that, you know, we're trying to be good corporate actors and do some scale, use our scale for good. So again, I mentioned the climate action pillar. We also have a pillar around youth opportunity, packaging and recycling. We're very focused on that. Our commitment to family, so around kids nutrition, our happy meals, the ingredients there, and beef sustainability is another key focus of ours. So happy to talk to anyone in more detail about those pillars. I'll be around. So with regards to HB 2020, McDonald's was neutral. And we believe we can and have significantly reduced our carbon footprint. And we do this, you know, I've eat, sleep, and breathed this work over the last few years. But we can do that through renewable energy procurement, energy efficiency, new packaging, innovations, et cetera. So we're really working hard to do that. And with regards to Oregon, you know, we work with, our supply chain work with local farmers, and we purchase a lot of food from Oregon. So in 2017 alone, we purchased $52 million worth of food, mostly potatoes and onions here in Oregon. So we like your state. And so I think the point being is that while we are a large global company that serves 69 million people a day, which is 1% of the population, we're a community-based company, right? With local communities playing a really huge role at kind of the core of our business. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Mark, welcome. Mark fed us last night. Mark Weigert is the owner of Whiskey Creek Oyster Hatchery. And he's a fourth-generation oyster farmer. We don't have a lot of those on the coast. That's pretty remarkable. And the owner of a shellfish hatchery in Netarts Bay. Mark is the supplier of over 90% of the oyster seed in Oregon. And anybody that's been on the coast knows we had a significant problem with oyster seed production a few years ago. Mark was at ground zero helping scientists from Oregon State trying to figure out how to solve that problem. That is the result of ocean acidification. And so you're hearing this theme come up. But Mark lived through it and knows all about it. In 2005, when the die-off occurred, Mark almost went out of business. So, and he's been in a bad way because of all these issues that are occurring. The work was done, the water quality issues were identified, the buffering occurred, they know now how to solve the problem and let those oyster seeds begin to grow their shells. And Mark's back in business, and we're certainly glad because those Kumamotos last night were pretty fabulous. Yes, thank you. There's a hand. I ate way more than I should have. Through the research, though, now they understand the concerns and are able to mitigate it, but that's just the beginning. Although for now the oyster industry is back on its feet, it's temporary if the ocean's pH level continues to change. So those are concerns. Mark and his work were featured in episodes of Willapa Bay Oysters in 2012 and 13, and he's been seen also nationally on a PBS show, ANOVA, in 2015. He's an expert in this field, and we're really delighted he's here today to talk about the position that he and his industry have taken on the 2020 bill. Thanks for being here, Mark. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, Mark. Are you on? There you go.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we experienced a problem about 12 years ago where we just couldn't produce shellfish larvae, and I've told this story so many times. I can't believe that somebody in this crowd hasn't already heard it, but it's very dire. Luckily, we were able to overcome the problem, and the time when we were struggling, we didn't even know what to call it. I mean, we had no idea. The scientists were telling us that the pH of the ocean would always be constant, don't worry about that. Well, fast forward, we have to deal with it every day. It's the pH of the ocean's dropped. It's caused a lot of problems with producing shellfish larvae. And, you know, like Laura was talking about, you know, it's a big part of our coastal economy is our seafood. And so we had to figure a way to come out of this thing, and we did, luckily. I mean, we're still in business. It's not to say that we don't struggle. We struggle all the time in different ways. And when you talk about pH of the ocean, it's more than just that. It's hypoxia. You get odd algal blooms. The water temperature is going up. You have a whole bunch of things going on all the time that you're trying to overcome. And so when this House Bill 2020 came up, you know, I mean, I appreciate, you know, the effort that people make to try to make this a better state and a better place to live. I'm just not convinced that this is the route we ought to take. I have different ideas, and I think everybody on this panel has got different ideas about how we take this problem on. But I think we all agree on one thing, is that we got to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere. It's causing us a lot of problems, not just with ocean acidification, but with other things as well. Our quality of life, you know, a lot of different things. And so, if I get to talk later, I will give you the reasons why I think we could go a different direction on this thing. House Bill 2020 I consider a starting point. I don't consider it an ending point. I just think that there's better ways to do things. And as we say in the hatchery, be careful how you spend money on a problem. It doesn't always fix that problem. And, you know, I look at this House Bill 2020 as a way to try to generate revenue to combat this carbon thing, but I do believe there's other ways we can do it without having to put a burden on our businesses. I just, you know, I'm all about getting rid of carbon, don't get me wrong, but I think there's other ways we can do it, and that we already have in place right now.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to start with Chad with my first question. You touched on a number of things, the panelists touched on a number of things, but you represent a very unique industry, partly because your prices are fixed and it puts you in a unique position. I know that dairy farmers have been monitoring emissions and mitigating those emissions through voluntary adaptations of best practices for a long time. I know a number of dairies you represent, large and small, are working very hard towards investment in digesters and capturing methane and producing renewable power. I guess what I'd like to know, from your perspective, what is the industry already doing to mitigate emissions production? What do you see in the future for your industry? And when it comes to the actual down and dirty of the pennies that you talk about when it comes to transportation costs, price of milk, are there other ways that we can do this that wouldn't be as impactful on the dairy industry, where we could move forward with something that would work?
Well, I think, you know, looking at dairy in Oregon, you know, we've always been big investors in innovation and new technology. Years ago, the state had some big taxes that help offset some expenses in digesters. And we have one big digester over on the East Coast. We have 3 in operation in Tillamook. It probably represents about 50% of the cows that participated in digester in Tillamook. You know, those don't go without their cost. There's got to be some personal commitment to participate in a digester. They do have some other things that increase costs on the farm, but you got to be committed to the reduction. And without having programs set up that the state is committed in the long run, make those sometimes unattractive. And because renewable energy, at least in the beginning, isn't real cost effective. And so you may have a reduction in methane, but in the long term, you know, if you don't have support of that, it's not sustainable and they shut down because it is just an operation. You shouldn't really want your energy costs to go up to make renewable energy affordable. You know, Oregon has the luxury of having hydro, which is a huge asset for renewable energy already. You know, things that Oregon dairy farmers have done in reduction of their carbon footprint has been in areas of nutrition. We keep track of something almost on a daily basis that we get back from our processors, and that's in a form called our milk urea nitrogen. And that's something that indicates the efficiency of the protein in our feed. And it's one of those things that helps our bottom line. So protein's expensive. So if you're overfeeding protein, then it increases the nitrogen level of your manure, and you have excess methane production. And so being able to fine tune that, you do a couple of things. You reduce your feed costs, and then you also reduce your carbon footprint. You know, investments in application processes. You know, moving away from aerial application and to getting stuff injected directly into the ground reduces things like the carbon footprint also. Investments in GPS satellite communication with the tractors and planting and precise planting and these kinds of things have also helped become more efficient. You know, almost all the tractors now that you buy all have these exhaust fluid requirements in them, and that you're also reducing your carbon footprint by that way.
So it sounds like your industry is already doing quite a bit to reduce emissions, and that's been happening for quite some time. Would the passage of the carbon reduction policy in Oregon affect your ability to compete in a global market?
Well, there's no type of agriculture that has borders. So whether we're talking about dairy or beef, you know, we're a traded commodity, and it's huge. And so when you have states that start developing rules that are specific to their state, they often can put sectors of agriculture at a disadvantage. You know, trade is a huge thing for agriculture, and so we make a surplus of milk that can be consumed domestically, and so the world market is critical. Our paychecks are all determined, at least, you know, for us in Tillamook, we're off of Class 3 milk. Well, that's a commodity that's traded in Chicago, and so that sets the base. And that's just the way it is. In all of our feedstuffs, the corn is another great example. One example that I could probably give you that, you know, sort of in relation to making policies that was devastating to the dairy and in the animal production sector was ethanol. When you have energy compete with your food stuff, the farmer's going to lose every time if you're in animal production. Now, if you're growing corn, it was the greatest thing in the world. And so you had two sectors in agricultural fighting at the state and the federal level, you know, the Corn Belt's just pounding more and more, you know, mandates and you know, the beef guys and the chicken guys and the dairy guys. I mean, you know, for us personally, when corn was traded, you know, almost $8 a bushel in 2009, it almost bankrupted us. You know, and so what happens is that family farms have to leverage all their equity. You know, we're equity rich and cash poor. And you know, whether you're raising chickens or growing beef or carrots, I mean, that's just the way it is. So it's a global market. You know, you've got to be careful. You know, sometimes creating the offsets, you know, is one where you get into, you know, trying to figure out what makes sense. You know, what can we do to make this situation that is successful? Well, every operation is different. Some family farms might be able to invest and have the capital to invest in some of these new technologies. Some aren't. Some aren't going to have the use of it. So there's just a lot of unknowns.
Thank you. I think we'll go to Laura. Laura, you come from a kind of a, not the same as Chad, but you're a coastal resident, you're running a business, it's resource-based, so you have you know, similar aspects to what you do, not exactly, but similar aspects, but you're coming from a different perspective on this. And it would be interesting to me, and I think our audience, to know, this is going to impact you as well with transportation costs and other costs that are going to be incurred, but you support carbon pricing, even though it is going to raise your cost of doing business. So talk a little bit more about your perspective from a small, not so small, but a business owner on the coast.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of what we talk about, particularly in the hindsight of 2020, is, you know, who are the winners and who are the losers economically. And I don't think it's quite so simple. The natural resource sector appears that it's going to be more impacted by fuel, for example, fuel taxes. And frankly, yes, that really sucks from a business perspective. You know, all of our suppliers, whether it's our dairy, our beef, our cardboard, everything, our seafood obviously is going to increase in price for that. But, you know, I would say the flip side of that is, while natural resources may end up bearing a higher end of the cost, they also have the most to gain from timely action, or the most to lose from inaction, because we can't just up and move our headquarters, not all of us anyways. You know, we're very land-based, very place-based, and so from a terrestrial perspective, if I look at drought and rangeland wildfires and forest fires, I think, well, those entities can't just up and move their family farms and their forests to other places, whereas another business might be able to move to another country or turn up the air conditioning a couple of degrees if it just gets hotter. And from a fisheries perspective, I've come to see it kind of the same way. This ocean acidification in my mind is kind of like a forest fire raging in the ocean. It's caustic, it's burning, it's sucking up oxygen, and yet we have no idea how big it is or how big it's going to get. And one thing that we do know from our science is that the carbon that's falling now, we're not even going to see that for another 25 years because of the way it sinks and comes up upwelling in the future. So for all of those reasons, I say I either have to pay now or I pay an ultimate price, which is a total loss of access to the resource base in the case of fisheries. So I think that's why, unlike other taxes and costs that I'll stand up and fight against, this is one that I'm facing with a little bit more austerity in saying something has to be done.
Thank you. Macy, at the end of the session, Those of us who were in Salem that day saw a lot of truckers and loggers show up for several rallies at the Capitol with concerns about 2020. What were some of the primary concerns that the trucking industry had with last session's carbon bill?
Well, I think this is interesting. Kind of piggybacking on what you're saying is that I think in general, people from the natural resources industries want to see environmental changes. I mean, I think in general, we all care about the environment, but when you're talking about cap and trade, we don't really see that with this. House Bill 2020, yes, you're going to be taxing, but like in the case of trucking and transportation, we don't have a good alternative source. We can't stop trucking. 80% of Oregon's rural or communities are reliant on trucking to get their goods. So if we don't have a good alternate source, meaning that we don't have battery or we don't have a more fuel efficient way to get our goods to these communities, then really we're not fixing a problem, if that makes sense. So I guess my question is that it really doesn't fix anything. It creates maybe a revenue source, but there's not actually a solution. Trucking doesn't have there's not another solution for this. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming down the pipeline, but what they're talking about as far as trucking with like with our weight capacity and what we move up and down the road, where they're talking about these being solutions in like 20 years, not 5. So it's not like it's not actually helping the environment. So I think that's where you're seeing our frustration levels. It doesn't actually help something. So where a passenger car, if their fuel prices go up, they have the choice to go out and buy a more fuel efficient car. In the trucking industry, since 1990, our emissions have gone down by 98%. We have nowhere to go. We've already done that. We've already improved our technologies. We've already done what we're supposed to do. And so we don't have anywhere to improve, if that's to be said. So I think that's where you're seeing our frustration levels, is that there's nowhere for us to go. This is only going to affect our bottom line. This is only going to chase business away. And truly, if you start talking about it from a business perspective, trucks don't stop at the border. So that means that it really only affects my business for trucks that are coming into Oregon. It doesn't stop. I mean, Washington trucks aren't facing the same types of cap and trade that Oregon would be facing, right? So by chasing Oregon trucking companies out of Oregon, you're not really solving any kind of environmental issue. You're just moving them into a different state where they don't have the same regulations, correct? So I think that's where you're seeing frustration levels. If you really care about the environment, it should be on a national level. It should be on a global level. You're not going to fix any kind of ocean acidic level or oxidation level on a state level per se. I think it's more of a global issue or a national issue. And I also, like I said, if we had an alternative, if we had something that we could do or we could improve or we could change, I think we'd be for it. But we don't at this point. All it's going to do is increase our costs, nothing more. We don't have we're going to invest in better. We don't have better. We've already invested in better. We have in the last 20 years, if that makes sense.
Thank you. It sounds like what I'm hearing you say is trucking costs are already expensive in Oregon. This puts you at a competitive disadvantage.
Oh yeah, from that standpoint, if you were to look at us, we're number 1 in the nation. We're number 1 in the nation. It costs us $30,000 in taxes and regulations a year to run a truck in Oregon. California's number 2 at $23,000. So it costs us $7,000 more in taxes and registrations here in Oregon to run a truck. That's double the national average. So for me as a trucking owner, I have 30 trucks. You do the math. It costs me a lot more just to run a truck in Oregon, and that's just with my taxes and registrations. That doesn't include my fuel costs.
Great, thank you. Nancy, I appreciated your opening comments, and we are not meeting our state's carbon reduction goals. So we all know something has to give. I think there's a great desire to move forward with something. The question is, what's that going to be? You represent a broad group of businesses that come from a very positive perspective, but you represent a broad swath of different types of business organizations. Are you hearing from your members, now that we are in this position to do kind of a look back at 2020 and look forward to see where we might go, where positive changes might occur in legislation that could make this bill palatable moving forward in a bit different fashion? What are you hearing from your members now that we've run into this little bit of a roadblock or this little bit of a speed bump?
Right. Well, thank you for the question. Our members are, are dairies and farmers and fisheries and technology companies and others with trucking companies who aren't members of ours but have come and spoken at some of the roadshow that happened around the state in support of this. Generally have the same sort of perspective that Laura does, which is we all have to do something. I believe there's a sense that, of course, this would be better done at a federal level, but the federal administration has abdicated its responsibility and walked away from the Paris Accord, and that responsibility has moved to the states. We would love nothing better than to see this sunset and be moved to federal legislation. I also know, especially in my days working in government, that when federal legislation is passed, it's often really put in place through muscle back in the East. And Western states, and Oregon in particular, does business differently. And if the Western states can take the lead on how this happens, that will become the model for how federal legislation is drafted. And we think that's a big deal, or it won't be as positive for our businesses. I also think our folks have said consistently that two things. Oregon is comprised primarily of small businesses. I lived this every day when I was Governor Kulongoski's policy director for economic development. I don't come at this work from an environmental perspective. I'm about businesses and jobs, and I worked with small businesses. As a matter of fact, Mark and I were talking before the panel. I worked with Senator Johnson to get the big units that they now have on site at Whiskey Creek when that terrible situation first occurred. And I know that they're looking for federal monies to do ocean acidification water monitoring. The feds aren't giving them the money because there's no state money to match it. And if we can get some of these dollars to match those federal dollars, we can start to do those sorts of innovation and resiliency efforts that we've been stuck on. But more than anything, and our organization, I think uniquely, has been saying we are inventors. I think Senator Wyden, I wrote it down, said, in Oregon we grow stuff, we make stuff, we innovate stuff, and we export stuff. We want to see Oregon be a leader as we move to this carbon-constrained global economy. Over half the world is already operating under some sort of carbon pricing. So we aren't unique in the global marketplace in any way, shape, or form. California did this and has already reauthorized. All the folks who were opposed to it when it was first passed supported it when it came back up because they recognized their economies were continuing to thrive. The diversification of some economy opportunities actually expanded. And I would like to see places like OIT. I know the president of OIT is here. I'd like to see OSU, who has been so integral to innovation in the natural resource-based economy that we have depended on here in the state, thrive. We are either going to get mowed down by this, or we are going to lead. Are we going to create jobs with this? Or are we going to wait and see what happens and then fall prey to whatever somebody else decides? And I think on the trucking and transportation issue, it has been particularly challenging. And the fact of the matter is transportation generates the largest percentage of carbon emissions in the state of Oregon, over 40% according to some, 36 according to other estimates, but in any case, the preponderance of it comes from transportation-related emissions. We need to do something about that or we aren't going to meet our goals. Daimler just came out with its prototype large haul trucking. Ford F-150 just came out with an all-electric truck, which I personally would love to get because I have major truck envy now. I have a little Ford truck, and it can pull over 1 million pounds. Cummins Trucking bought Bramo Motors down in Talent, Oregon. They're doing electric vehicle manufacturing. This is happening. Arcimoto, I worked with Arcimoto over 10 years ago on this. And so these transitions are happening. It's like saying, oh, well, the horse and buggy really is here to stay, and that car thing Ford came up with is just a fad. It's changing, and so our members want to know how can we lead on that front and create more jobs and find a diversified economy that is going to make sure our families around our state have family wage jobs. So we really come at it from a different perspective.
So I wanted to take this one step further. So my question was, are you hearing from your membership that there are changes that could be made in this bill to move it forward, or are you saying that your membership is comfortable with the bill the way it is and would like to move it forward in the form in which it came in 19?
I think our members were comfortable with the bill as it was moving through the legislative process in the 19th session. I think our members are also pragmatists. These are business people. They understand you can't always get everything you want, and there's a whack-a-mole process that happens. You push down here, it pops up over there. You push down there, it pops up over there. And then,
welcome to politics.
Yes. And I have a big hammer, and we go around and we push down and see what comes up over there. And one of the reasons I'm really intrigued by the conversation today is we need to have a better understanding. I think one of the things our members said was we weren't listening very well to each other. And if we listen better, and it's certainly what my organization is going to be doing a lot of this fall, maybe there are places we can make some changes, or if there are some changes around the edges that need to be made in order for this to be successful in the short session, I think our members are open to hearing that, but they're mostly concerned about the long-term impacts and the need to lead. And I also would like to say, with the energy-intensive trade-exposed industries who will be regulated under whatever cap-and-trade legislation ultimately moves forward, in the last bill, there was 95% free allowances for the first several years. And the intent there is give these organizations time to transition. I've been reading about innovations in concrete manufacturing. Ash Grove out in Baker is a major employer in that community. Of course we care about that. And I would love to see Ash Grove take this CO2 sequestering innovation that's starting to get to scale and lead. And so 95% allowances we think are really helpful. The numbers that translates into for these businesses is relatively small compared to their annual sales. And it gives folks time. And we hope some of those reinvestments go to that innovation and technology advances as we're transitioning. We can't just stop and wait and then do something. The longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be for our businesses, and we don't want that.
Thank you. So Bill, you were very passionate and very articulate in your opening comments, and I know that the Wanamill is it's a huge employer. It's a very important employer in your part of the state. Were it to close, and I think you touched on this, but I'd like to drill down a little bit more. Where do you speculate that our paper products would come from? How does that help us solve our problem, or does it not? And I think you began to talk about that. And I know that you have explained how the Wanamill's already reduced carbon emissions, and you were green before green was cool, because it's good for business. But what is next in the steps that your industry can take? Are there next steps? Are you already using all the best practices you can? Talk a little bit about what's going on, not in your industry, but also just really specifically at the GP mill.
Specifically the GP mill, excuse me. I had 6 grandchildren this weekend, and one of them gave me a bug. The Wanna Mill as a whole, if it was to close right now, I'm not supposed to say the big box store that everybody goes and buys the industrial side of everything, that their tissue is made at the Wanna Mill, not just in Oregon, but the whole western United States all come out of the GP Wanna Mill. Through technology, we are doing more with less as it is. If it was to stop, the production would just shift to a Crossett, Arkansas, or a Muskogee plant where they are basically burning coal. And I've already said, and I won't go back and get snake eyes of what we're using. So again, it gets back to this is a global and a regional issue. If we were to shut down production at one, it would just shift to another state. The actual demand for paper is actually on the increase, even though we have done away with a lot of the printed paper because of the technology and everything out there. The demand is still on the increase. So where we get it from, we are actually shifting our environmental burden to somebody else instead of taking care of it in-house and the way we already have. And I won't go through the whole list of everything that my mill has done and the pulp and paper industry has done to reduce our carbon footprint. We are already mandated by Boilerback, which is the best available control technology out there for anything that comes out of a stack, and not just our mill, but any industry. We are just under the mandates of the NAAQS, which is the National Air Ambient Quality Standards and Criteria. We already have to follow. We're followed under that by the federal level, and we have already reduced the best that we can. The only way to reduce emissions out of my mill is to actually shut down production or shut down the pulp mill, which takes our competitive disadvantage away. We are the only integrated mill. When I mean integrated mill, that means the logs come in, we chip them, we turn them into pulp, we recycle whatever we can, we turn that back into energy, we make paper, and we get it out into the consumers. And when I say the West Coast, it is everything from the Rocky Mountains west and from Canada down into Mexico. It is a big, big region, and that is all coming out of this state. And we have earned the right to make those products by internally competing with not only mills outside of our organization, but sister mills within the Georgia Pacific family. And the way we have done it is we have had to scale down our workforce. We are doing more with less. We are working more hours. We have done about everything we can, A, to keep that mill running, B, to make our carbon footprint as low as can get. We've talked about forest fires. We've talked about the ocean. Nobody wants to point the finger east. And everybody knows that a lot of the demand for the paper and it coming in because there's been trade acts filed and everything of the dumping of the paper in the United States market is coming from foreign competitors. Anything that comes out of one of them stacks that have no emissions, that have no EPA, that have no Boilermax, that have no NAAQS, is in this country within 7 to 10 days. That is where the focus needs to be.
Thank you.
Did I keep it under time?
You did great. You did just great. I want to go back to kind of the charge of this panel just for a second. We're discussing the costs and action and inaction associated with Oregon's proposed cap and trade emissions. We're going to discuss policies that mitigate cost impacts. I want to, Bill, one more time come back and say, is there anything that could be done to the 2020 the way it was proposed that could bring your industry to a position of neutrality or support of this bill?
Professionally or personally, I will talk to the people that run
Have
my
at it.
company. For the
We're a
people
friendly
that-
crowd here.
For the people that run my company, and everybody knows who they are. I think if we were to get exclusions for the best available control technology, we're already mandated to do that. That it shouldn't be, you're gonna get a decrease in your tax. Let's call it what it is. It is a tax. I don't care. You can put lipstick on a pig is a pig. It is a tax, and it is a tax to do business in the state of Oregon. I think if we're mandated by the federal government, which every industry is out there, and if we aren't doing it, by God, we fine them and shame on us for not doing it. But if we are already at the best standard we can get, we need to get an exclusion to keep it in there, and actually, instead of taxing us out of pretty much existence in the state of Oregon, it needs to be, you need to get the right people to sit down at a table and work on the right problem and put politics aside and put the environment, whatever, we want to jump on the sword first and pray to God everybody else follows us. Where my fear is, you're going to see what Oregon did, and they're going to go, we ain't going down that route. And they aren't going to, and if industry was to close, and lo and behold, 10 or 15 years, we said, oh, we made a mistake, they aren't going to rush back in here. Personally, what I feel is we need to attack it at not just the national level, but a global level, and we need to hold the people that are actually polluting our world and our environment accountable, and not just say, I'm going to be a poster child and pray to God somebody else follows us.
Emma, once again, thank you so much for traveling all this distance to talk to us. How many McDonald's do we have in Oregon? Do you know that?
Yes. Okay, you're testing me here. It's 165, and we have 31 franchisees.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, there's one an hour south, there's one a half hour south, there's one here, there's one an hour north. Beyond that, we'd have to talk to Representative Gomberg and Senator Roblin. And then talk to Representative Mitchell and Representative Witt and find out what's farther up. But we do have quite a few on the coast. From a corporate perspective, you have such an interesting perspective in this group because you're not Oregon-based, you're way outside, but you have a presence here. What does a carbon reduction policy in a small state like Oregon mean for a global corporation like McDonald's?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. So I'm going to answer this kind of in a roundabout way here, but so I joined McDonald's 2.5 years ago, and when I joined, two things really surprised me about the company, and this may come as a shock to you, but I was shocked at the scale of McDonald's. So obviously, global company. I mentioned some numbers to you earlier, but there was a story told in my orientation that really stuck with me. So here, you guys can take this away today as a fun fact about McDonald's, and this is true. So about 2 years ago, we launched a sandwich with avocado. Does anyone remember that sandwich? Did you have it?
I don't know if we had it in Oregon.
Yeah, it was delicious.
Representative Bynum would know.
It was delicious. But before we even launched that sandwich, we had to conceptualize it, right? So our chefs sat down, and by the way, our head chef told this story to us, our group of kind of new employees, right? And he said, before we even, had to think about launching this sandwich, we had to, think about what we needed to do to get the materials for the sandwich, right? So obviously avocado being the main feature of the sandwich, they said, they had to look at our supply chain and see, do we have enough avocados in our supply chain? No. Then they had to look at the rest of the world. Do we have enough avocados in the world? And the answer was no. And so we had to wait 2 years until McDonald's personally kind of worked with our supply chain to increase the amount of avocados in the world so that we wouldn't affect a whole ecosystem and drive up the prices for everyone else on avocado, right?
That's why the price is
No. The price of avocados went up.
No, we're responsible. That's the point of the story. You're taking the wrong thing away.
It's all connected.
It's all connected, right? struck me, right, at the beginning, and working in sustainability, I thought, wow, this is an amazing opportunity to do good and to make a difference, right? And then the second thing that struck me about working at McDonald's was kind of conflicting of that, which is our tie to local communities, like Oregon, right? So, you know, we have operators, we have 165 operators here, and they all have a very specific tie to their community. You know, they invest, they sponsor Little League teams, they make a point to connect to our communities, right? So there is a strong tie to communities on the restaurant side. Also on the supply chain side, obviously we invest a lot of money in Oregon. We buy a lot of our products here. So we're very much, we have a stake in the game when it comes to Oregon. So definitely, going back to your question, I think, a carbon reduction policy we would support. Obviously, it would have to make sense for our business, right? We got to look out for what we call the 3 legs of our stool. So corporate, supply chain, and our franchisees. And if one of those legs falls short, the stool falls, right? So if we have an increased price for our potato suppliers, we have to consider that. So
We'll talk to Senator Bentz about that, Representative Finley.
there you go. So that's it.
Great, thank you. What do you think about straws?
Yeah, this is a loaded question. I'm going to plead some.
That was not in
ignorance here.
HB 2020, just so everyone knows.
Yeah, this is not related, but no, we actually supported the straw upon request bill in Oregon. So we're
Thank
very
you.
much in support of that. Yep.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Mr. Weigert, I so appreciate your expertise in this, and you do come with such an interesting perspective. As a small business owner, talk to me a little bit about, is there potential with changes to this bill to make it palatable to a small business owner in Oregon that has the viewpoint that you do? What can be done to this bill to make it work?
Am I here? Yeah. No, I'm just going to say this, Caddy. In the world that I live in, particularly with ocean acidification, it doesn't matter if we do something or do nothing. I have 60 years, I've been told I have 60 years of acidified water coming at us every day, no matter what we do. And
Is that the upwelling factor?
well, the upwelling brings it in. The upwelling brings it in, but this acidified water is accumulating at the bottom of the ocean. And
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because there may be people in here that don't
I'd rather
understand
talk about
the
that than
dynamic.
the other question.
Give us a short version of why 60 years.
Well, so acidified water, and before I get into that, I think as Oregonians, we've got to start taking our scientists a little more seriously. They've helped us a lot. There was actually a panel, acidification and hypoxia. We've done a lot of work, spent a lot of hours trying to come up with solutions to, give to the governor and to the legislative body on how to move forward on this issue. And they've come up with, monitoring is one thing they've done, which is what we use. And monitoring actually helps us as a hatchery to tell when the water is good or bad. And that's very critical for us because when we're fertilizing eggs in the hatchery, obviously the bad water is, it doesn't matter how many times you try it, you will get zero survival. And so through the monitoring, we've been able to predict when it's a good time to fertilize and when it's not, and that really helps us out a lot. But this water, this acidified water, I'm going to assume most people know, but I'll say it one more time, is that it is compounded by the CO2 that interfaces with the ocean. It sinks out, it creates PCO2, and it's low acidic water, and it also has other problems associated with it, like hypoxia. Now this summer in our hatchery, we had some hypoxic events almost to the whole summer, which we don't normally see. And that causes a lot of problems. But in the hatchery, we can oxygenate, but what happens is a lot of times is that it'll actually kill the more advanced organisms like adult oysters and things like that, because they simply just don't get enough oxygen to survive. And I've seen that event this summer. So, you know, really the question here is, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this acidified water, particularly when somebody's telling us that we got 60 years of this stuff coming at us? And it's a very difficult thing to try to overcome. And I'm on board with Bill over here in that this is a global issue. Here's my suggestion. I call it Mark Wagner's 3 points of how to get out of this mess. And the first thing we do is we stop sniveling about it and getting all worked up about it. We got to work the problem. I know that there's a movement to try to get rid of the carbon and this and that. I'm totally on board with that, but we got to start working the problem. And I am really big on loading up a bunch of delegates from Oregon, foresters and people like that, and let's go down to the Amazon jungle and figure out how we can plant more trees, because they're cutting faster than, this is really hurting the planet. We gotta be able to get the Brazilians back on board and replant the rainforest. That to me is number one. Number two, we got to get cars off the road, and I'm big on saying, we got to invest in mass transport. This race to get rid of acidification is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We're in it for the long haul, and the sooner that we can lower the CO2 in the atmosphere, the sooner the oceans are going to start self-correcting themselves, and here in Oregon, we take a lead on a lot of different things. I believe we've taken the lead on acidification. The Coastal Caucus has been behind us 100%. There's things that we can do to show the world that we're on the right track. But I send out a caution that what I don't want to do is take the wheels off our economy. Okay. Working jobs, and believe me, I understand what it's like to almost lose your job. I almost lost my entire business back in 2007. But, we need to plant more trees, try to sop up the CO2 in the atmosphere. Am I off base here, Caddy? I don't even know where I'm at.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine, Mark. I just want to ease your mind, though. In the 2017 transportation bill, we imposed a very, very small payroll tax, and it is generating about $120 million on a regular basis that we are using to increase investment in transit. And all of your local transit organizations have access to this funding that is going to increase the time the transit routes operate, increase their reach, make community connections. So that is something that we've done. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. So you don't need to lay awake at night, not sleeping, worrying about our investing in transit, because we did it.
Well, thank you for,
We will continue to invest in it when we pass thoughtful carbon legislation as well.
Can't be spent on transit. So, Mark, just for you to wrap up, is there anything in this bill that could be changed that would make it more palatable to you as a small business owner who has concerns about its impact?
I'm not crazy about the bill. What would I do to change it to that's something that I could live with? I'm stuck with 60 years of bad water, so this bill's not going to really help me out.
Not solving your problem.
I know, but I think to be fair, maybe it's the way the money is spent. I know there's been suggestions of research, and I've been down that road. It's great to have research, but we're sort of hands-on. I mean, I'm from Tillamook. I mean, we work the problems. I'm very leery about where the money's going to go.
Okay, that's fair.
That's,
Thank you.
That's my opinion.
Thank you. Ms. McDonough, you represent a large general membership organization with a number of members who have differing viewpoints about this bill. Were there any unifying themes in the concerns that you heard from your members, unifying themes in the support that your members came forward with? I know that your organization is neutral. What do you think were the most important lessons learned in the 2019 session regarding this issue? Is there a way to improve it should the bill come back in the original form?
Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, with 1,600 members, we have a lot of diverse opinions, but I will say that there was a unifying theme, that there a recognition of this issue, and that it needs to be addressed at some level. But it needs to be addressed in a way that's good for Oregon, that builds our economy, doesn't create costs, and doesn't create a system where some aspects of our state are more impacted than the others. And I mentioned that the cost issue really is where I think this bill started to come apart in a very big way. When the language was finally introduced, it was a hugely complex bill, many, many pages. And it was clear from the very beginning that a lot of work had gone into it, but some of the most impacted parties apparently hadn't been consulted and thought about as much as they might have been. And what we saw was that some sectors of the economy were accommodated at the front end, but others weren't at all, and so they were going to end up with a lot of the costs that were coming from the bill. So right from the get-go, it was as if we had this system of winners and losers, and the conversation became about how do you address those cost issues, reduce costs to different sectors, because it was lobbied sector by sector, instead of what we should have been having, which was a broader conversation about how we could come together and address this issue collectively, reduce carbon, and do it in a way that builds our economy and not create costs that were very harmful to other sectors. And I think that winner or loser mentality made it very difficult to move the bill forward. And I think we saw that particularly when the committee went on the road and they were in rural communities, and we started to see the really big impact to rural economies of the bill and the disparities and how the impacts were going to be. And that voice came through, and it was really important, and I think had a great impact. At ODI, we were very concerned about the impact to our manufacturing members. About a quarter of our members are manufacturers, and a lot of them are in global economies. We've heard this from others, but small marginal costs make a very big difference in the ability of a manufacturer to compete globally, and that means jobs here at home. And we have members who have plants in other states and plants in other countries, and they could easily, if the costs here got too great, shift production elsewhere. We talked a lot about transportation, which impacts all of the industries across the state, from ag to Amazon, and the costs from that and how that would impact the bill. And I do think that the cost to consumers was one that we never really got into as much. The price of gasoline, and it was going to be a potentially huge increase per gallon on gasoline, and whether you drive to work or you drive your kid to school, that was going to impact it. So I wouldn't say actually, Kathy, that we were neutral. I think where we were was we were not opposed to a bill passing, but at the end of the day, we thought 2020 didn't address the cost to manufacturing and the cost to transportation adequately, and we weren't happy with the bill as it came forward. And I think as we look at if the bill comes back, I think we have to get beyond that winner and loser conversation. conversation. We've got to find a way where people are coming together and the bill isn't being imposed on people, but people are being brought to the table collectively and added to come up with a solution that more can agree to. Nancy mentioned the Clean Air Act of 1990, and which created, I think, the first really successful cap and trade program in this country. I was at DC at the time, and I lobbied that bill for a company that was very impacted by it, and it's really different. In that bill, allowances were allocated, but there was no price to the allowances. And so I'm not going to say the bill didn't have big costs for the industries that were impacted, but the revenue was different, and the conversation was difficult, but it was very different from this one. So I hope we can address those cost issues, which are real and very impactful to a lot of businesses in the state, and try to have a collective conversation that brings people together more than we did this time.
Thank you. We have just a brief moment for any final comments now that we've gone through a round of questions, we've gone through our introductions and our opening remarks. Is there anything that we missed that any of you on the panel would like to take just a moment to reiterate? Is there anything else you want to add? Please.
Thank you. The other issue that I think, and we heard this on the roadshow, is the Main Street businesses who don't tend to be our members because we have bigger companies as our members, who are impacted by the cost of fires and the cost of a decreased snowpack and the cost of drought. If you run a family restaurant in the Main Street of a small community, and you now don't have a tourism industry coming to that area. So the trickle-down impact of economic disadvantage to what's happening because of climate volatility is rolling all the way downhill as well. And I think to the winners and losers, we could put a bunch of people in lots of different columns. I think we have to have a more coordinated conversation around how do we move forward with all of that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think,
Go ahead, Sandy.
yeah, sorry. One of the things we heard on this panel is all of the innovation that's happened in this state. That we have our mills that have already done a lot of controls, partly by requirement, but also because of cost controls and doing better. We have our farms doing more, trucks getting more and more efficient, Daimler is doing a lot. And I hope we can get to a place where we can be recognizing that innovation and growing on it, and looking at this as a way that we can foster and grow jobs in this state. And I don't think we got there. I think it was, we didn't adequately consider the work that's already been done, and we need to build from that.
Thank you. Bill, final comments?
How many minutes do I got?
You get one.
I'm just gonna leave you with this.
One.
And I have seen the pendulum swing both ways, and somehow we have to bring it back to the middle and have intelligent conversations and all that. When I am making paper the most bio-neutral that I can, carbon neutral that I can out there, these are some staggering numbers that I got, and anybody that drives to Eastern Oregon will see them. One wind turbine, it takes 900 tons of steel, 2,500 tons of concrete, 4,500 tons of plastic. That's just in one turbine. 90% of the turbines are coming from China. You see them come up the Columbia River. And again, we get back to no emissions. One car battery, an electric car, weighs 1,000 pounds, but it requires 500,000 pounds of dug up raw material and put in, and they aren't being built here. They're being built somewhere else. So when we're talking about going green, that's why I said you got to get the people in the room with the right mindset and the right goal. When you talk about going green, sometimes going green is not the right thing for this environment. And when I say this environment, this is not Oregon. Oregon does not live in a gated community, and everything that we do stays right here. It gets back to what Mark has said and other people have said. This is a global issue, and we do not need to jump on the sword and say, hey, look what we did. And then 10, 15 years later, say, we got it wrong. And that's what I'm getting into that. Sometimes what we have and making it work and reducing it in baby steps to get it right is doing our jobs to be stewards of the environment instead of just going completely the other way. And we're actually raping our environment to go so-called totally green when there has to be a balance somewhere. We need to find a way to seek a balance and do it right. Not tax industry out of here. My 1 minute's up. I'm getting the snake eyes. So I will tell you thank you. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bill. Mark?
Emma's probably going to slug me for saying this, but why don't we issue the Brazilians tree planting punch cards? They get 100 punches and they get a free Big Mac.
It's on you, Emma.
Okay, and with that, I'll take my closing comments. Yeah, no, I just want to reiterate, McDonald's is a large corporate. We believe in climate change, right? And we're committed to doing our part to reduce our carbon emissions. And I think that's what we're all here for, right? That's what this is about. We support a science-based approach and collaborative approach between public and private sectors to do that, right? And then the third thing I'll say is that, because this is near and dear to my heart, we need local programs that support that work, right? So in the work that I do around renewable energy, I'm looking for community solar programs in Oregon, right? That offer our franchisees direct access to renewable energy. So we would ask for support in reaching our goal there.
Thank you. Laura?
Sure.
Final comments, briefly?
What a great panel. All right, 30 seconds. I learned a lot here today, and a couple of the main themes that I'm taking away. One of my comments moving forward that I think is important for the coast especially is that this is framed not just as a terrestrial issue, but this is an ocean issue, very much so. I think some of the comments regarding where's the money going to go are really valid comments. There was a lot of confusion, myself included, about what this was going to fund, and we have such great assets here in Oregon with our universities, with our state agencies, collaboration with industry. We should be able to get more clarity on that. And being able to address this issue of how does this step that Oregon takes feed into the national and the global movement, because I think we all agree that's definitely the trajectory we need to go. So great panel. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you. Chad, any final comments?
Drink milk.
Well, I'd like to say, dairy cares about all these issues. And not only dairy, but I kind of feel like I'm representing agriculture for the entire state here. We don't work in borders. And so as you guys look, as continuous conversation, and looking at policies that are going to be measurable, that you can see results. The money thing was always a big issue for me too. A lot of some of the strategy often is, we'll make things good with this sector. We'll make sure they have some money out of this, and they got some money out of this, and they got some money out of offsets and this kind of stuff. I don't think that works. Coming up with the best policies that come up with the outcomes that we want. We've all been great stewards of the land, and the water, and the air. It's important to us. We'd like to see policies at the state level be developed in a way that put Oregon agriculture at an advantage and not always a disadvantage. All of our dairies and agricultural businesses in Oregon want to see a robust opportunity for the next generation and their families. Do you see opportunity? A lot of our dairy farms, especially go out of business because the next generation just doesn't see the hope to continue continue. I definitely want to, that's why I like to, not like, that's probably not the right word, take time to be part of politics and say things in my local community, because, I just don't want to stay home and complain about it. And it's not always that easy to participate and to be involved, but it is critical. And it's the types of things that all of us sitting up here, that these things may not necessarily impact us in our lifetimes, but these types of things that we're doing to provide opportunities for the next generation of Oregonians.
One of these days, we need a whole nother panel on keeping our kids on the coast, because we do have that migration, and it is a problem. So
It's a problem in Eastern Oregon as well. I remember talking to somebody in Burns who said people are born here and then they come back to die.
it's a
And
problem.
we want them here in between.
You're right. So thank you, Chad. Last words.
Last words would
Thank you,
be,
Macy.
I think, balance. I think that the environment really can't survive without industry. I mean, regardless or not, the environment needs money. It needs money because if all of the businesses leave the state, you're not going to be left with much. And quite honestly, the businesses won't stay. I mean, if we continue to lead down this path, then, and the businesses leave, then you're not going to be left with much. So we need to find balance. There needs to be a healthy balance in this state, because the businesses want to do what's right as far as the environment goes too. So there just needs to be balance. They need to move forward together. We need to work as businesses to have a healthy environment, and we need to work forward as a state to have healthy businesses so that they both can be successful together.
Thank you. I want the next panel is going to follow up with the changing climate of the carbon reduction conversation, Hindsight 2020, but it's the policymakers. So I would suggest you all stay. Some of the questions that you've raised, some of the issues that you've raised, you may find answers to in the next panel. What a remarkable wealth of viewpoints and knowledge and expertise we've had here. Please, round of applause.